Give your eyes a rest, and let your mind wander. No screens, just sound and imagination. Let the story begin. The last thing Li Lin remembered was the cool glass of the museum display case under her fingertips. She had reached out, strangely drawn to an ancient jade pendant said to belong to a tragic Ming dynasty bride. A sudden, violent dizziness had seized her, the world spinning into a vortex of light and darkness. She awoke to the scent of sandalwood and the feel of silk against her skin. Blinking, she found herself in a room lit by oil lamps, lying on a massive hardwood bed. The walls were draped with intricate tapestries, and the air was heavy with the smell of incense. "Miss Liang, you're awake!" A young girl in a simple hem dress rushed to her side, her eyes wide with relief and anxiety. "Thank the heavens! The general has been waiting. You must not anger him on your wedding day." Li Lin's head throbbed. "Wedding? General?" She pushed herself up and stumbled toward a bronze mirror. The face staring back was not her own. It was a delicate, pale face with large, phoenix eyes, beautiful, but utterly foreign. The man who entered was impossibly tall and severe, his features sharp and commanding, his eyes like chips of black observer. Before she could process it, the door slid open. A formidable silhouette filled the doorway, clad in dark, ornate armor that gleamed in the low light. The man who entered was impossibly tall and severe, his features sharp and commanding, his eyes like chips of black observer. "So, the fainting bride has decided to join us." His voice was a low, cold rumble, devoid of warmth. "Do not expect this marriage to be anything more than a formality. I have no need for a simpering, useless wife." The cold disdain in the general's voice, instead of frightening her, ignited a spark of modern indignation. Li Lin, still reeling from her situation, straightened her back and met his gaze squarely. The real Liang Mai might have been a timid noblewoman, but she was not. "General Shang Wei," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "if this marriage is such an inconvenience, why go through with it? Surely a man of your stature could find a way to refuse an imperial decree if he truly wished." A stunned silence fell over the room. The maid gasped softly, and the general's icy composure cracked for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed, scrutinizing her with a new, intense focus. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. The Liang Mai described to him was meek, uneducated, and would be cowed by his presence. "Watch your tongue," he warned, though his tone held more curiosity than anger. "You know nothing of the politics at play. I know that a man who complains about a cage but refuses to pick the lock is not truly interested in freedom," she retorted, a flicker of her modern spirit shining through. She gestured around the opulent room. "This seems like a rather gilded cage to me." General Shang Wei took a step closer, his imposing frame dwarfing her. He looked down at this enigma of a woman who had the audacity to challenge him on their wedding day. The fear he expected to see in her eyes was replaced by a defiant, intelligent light. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a low whisper meant only for her. Li Lin offered a small, mysterious smile. "Perhaps I am not the woman you were told to expect." The wedding ceremony was a blur of ancient rituals and stifling tradition. Li Lin, now trapped in the role of Liang Mai, moved through it like a ghost. General Shang Wei remained aloof, his jaw tight, performing his duties with cold precision. That night, he did not come to their chambers. Li Lin was relieved. She spent the hours studying the room, her mind racing. She was a prisoner of time, married to a man who despised her. But she was also a scholar of history. Perhaps that was her key. The next morning, she was summoned to the main hall. General Shang sat at a low table, surrounded by maps and scrolls, his commanders looking on grimly. "The supply route through the Western Pass has been cut off again by bandits," one commander reported. "Our men are low on rations. A direct assault is too costly." Shang Wei's expression was dark. "We have no choice. We must." "Excuse me." Li Lin's voice cut through the tense silence. All eyes turned to her. The general's gaze was icy. "This is no place for a woman. Leave. The bandits are using the narrow pass to their advantage, right?" she continued, ignoring him. She had written a paper on Ming-era guerrilla tactics. "A direct assault is what they expect. It's a trap." One of the commanders scoffed. And what would a noble woman know of traps and tactics? She stepped closer to the map, her finger tracing a path. There's a smaller trail here barely used. It's steep, but passable. Send a small elite team up this path at night. They can create a diversion from the ridge above the bandits' camp at dawn. When the bandits are distracted, your main force can charge the pass. They'll be caught between two fronts. A heavy silence filled the room. The strategy was simple, yet brilliant. It was not something taught to noble ladies. General Shang Wei stared at her, his earlier contempt replaced by a deep, unsettling intensity. How do you know of this trail? It is not on any official map. Li Lin met his gaze. I observe, General, something you clearly have not bothered to do with me. She turned and left the hall, leaving a room full of stunned soldiers and a general who was, for the first time, utterly captivated. General Shang Wei could not focus. The map before him was a jumble of lines. All he could see was the defiant spark in Liang Mai's eyes, the confident way her finger had traced the secret path. It was a path only seasoned scouts knew. How could she know? Who was this woman? He decided to test her. He ordered the operation as she had suggested. It was a resounding success. The bandits were routed with minimal casualties. His commanders looked at him with newfound respect, but he knew the credit was not his. That evening, he found her in the courtyard, staring at the moon. She looked ethereal, and for a moment, the formidable general felt a pang of something unfamiliar awe. The operation was a success, he stated, coming to stand beside her. I know, she replied softly, not looking at him. Your men are celebrating. He was silent for a long moment. You are not Liang Mai. Finally, she turned to him, a sad smile on her lips. The Liang Mai you were promised died the day of the wedding. I am what remains. Are you a spirit? A demon? He asked, his voice low. Not with fear, but with a desperate need to understand. I am a woman, she said, her gaze unwavering. A woman with a mind you never thought to look for. She reached out and gently touched a fresh cut on his arm, a minor injury from the skirmish. You're bleeding. Let me clean that. As she tended to his wound with a surprising efficiency, using clean cloth and boiled water methods far more advanced than the usual practices, Shang Wei felt the last of his resistance crumble. This was no demon. This was a miracle. A frustrating, infuriating, and utterly fascinating miracle. He had wanted a puppet, but fate had given him a partner. And the terrifying part was, he was starting to want her too. A strange fever swept through the military camp, felling strong soldiers. The physicians were baffled, speaking of imbalanced humors and evil spirits. The general watched as his men suffered, his face a mask of grim helplessness. Li Lin moved through the infirmary tents, her modern mind recognizing the symptoms of what was likely a waterborne illness. She saw the unsanitary conditions, reused bandages, contaminated water, and knew she had to act. General, she said, approaching him as he stood over a coughing soldier. This sickness spreads through dirty water and filth. You must order the latrines dug far from the water source. All drinking water must be boiled, and the bandages must be cleaned with hot water and dried in the sun. The head physician scoffed. Nonsense. This is a matter of spiritual purification, not hygiene. Shang Wei looked from the old physician to Li Lin. Her methods were strange, but her tactical advice had proven sound. He made a decision. Do as she says. It took 3 days. 3 days of implementing her strange rules while the physicians grumbled. But on the 4th day, the fever broke. New cases stopped appearing. The soldiers began to recover. The general found her by the river, washing used bandages herself. It worked, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Gratitude. Ah, you saved them. Li Lin looked up, her hands raw from the work. It's simple science, General, not magic. Science, knowledge, she corrected softly. The pursuit of knowledge. He knelt beside her, his large battle-scarred hand covering her wet, reddened one. The gesture was startlingly intimate. Teach me, he whispered. Their lessons began in secret, under the cover of night in his study. He, the mighty general, sat like a student while she, his useless bride, drew diagrams of germ theory on precious parchment and explained the basics of sanitation. One night, Frustrated by his inability to grasp why unseen germs could cause illness, she mixed ink with water. See this clear water? It looks clean, right? She dipped a quill and wrote a single character danger on a scrap of paper. Just because you can't see the danger doesn't mean it isn't there. The germs are like this ink, invisible in the water, but making people sick. The analogy struck him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just learning about medicine, he was learning a new way to see the world. He looked at her, bathed in the soft lantern light, her brow furrowed in concentration, and felt something shift irreversibly inside him. You see the world with different eyes, he murmured, his voice low. I see what's always been there, she replied, finally looking up from her drawing. She found his gaze intense, unwavering, and filled with a heat that had nothing to do with academic curiosity. The air between them grew thick and warm. The scrolls and maps were forgotten. Why are you really here, Liang Mai? He asked, using her name not as a label, but as a plea. Her breath hitched. I don't know, she confessed, the truth spilling out. One moment I was in my world, the next, I was here, in this body, in your life. Instead of recoiling in disbelief or fear, he reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. It was the lightest of touches, but it sent a shiver through her entire being. Then perhaps, he said, his thumb brushing her lower lip, the heavens sent you to open my eyes. He leaned in, and this time, she didn't pull away. The kiss was not one of brutal conquest, but of tender discovery. It was slow, questioning, a silent language spoken between two souls from different worlds. When they finally parted, the air crackled with unspoken admissions. Shang Wei rested his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers. I have spent my life facing tangible enemies on a battlefield, he confessed, his voice a raw whisper. But you are a mystery I cannot conquer, a puzzle I fear I may never solve. Li Lin's heart ached with a bittersweet joy. Some puzzles aren't meant to be solved, General, just appreciated. From that night on, their dynamic shifted entirely. He no longer dismissed her presence. He sought her opinions, not just on medicine or tactics, but on governance, on people. He discovered she possessed a sharp wit and a deep, unexpected wisdom that saw through courtly pretenses. The useless bride was becoming his most trusted confidant. He began bringing her small gifts, not jewels or silks, but things he thought would appeal to her curious mind. A rare text on celestial movements, a strange seed from a distant land, a beautifully crafted astrolabe. Each gift was a silent acknowledgement of who she truly was. During a banquet for a visiting dignitary, disaster struck. As was custom, Li Lin, as the hostess, took the first sip of wine from the general's cup to prove its safety. The moment the liquid touched her lips, a searing pain shot through her mouth. She gasped, dropping the cup, her face turning pale. Chaos erupted. Shang Wei was at her side in an instant, catching her as her legs gave way. His face, usually an impassive mask, was contorted with a terror so profound it silenced the entire hall. Physician, now! He carried her to their chambers, his orders sharp and frantic. As the physicians fussed, he knelt by the bed, clutching her limp hand. The poison was slow-acting, meant for him, designed to mimic a sudden illness. Don't you dare leave, he commanded her, his voice cracking. You cannot show me a new world only to vanish from it. Through the haze of pain, Li Lin saw the raw fear in his eyes. This was no longer a general protecting an asset. This was a man terrified of losing the woman he loved. Using her fading strength, she whispered the instructions for an antidote. Knowledge from a modern first aid course about certain alkaline poisons. Charcoal. Mix with water. Make me drink. They followed her frantic instructions. It worked. The crisis passed. As she lay recovering, weak but alive, Shang Wei never left her side. He held her hand, his usual stern demeanor replaced by a vulnerable tenderness. The assassin was in the employ of the northern warlord, his lieutenant reported quietly. Shang Wei's eyes hardened, but his touch on her hand remained gentle. This ends now, he vowed, his voice low and deadly. No one threatens what is mine. The word mine was no longer a claim of possession, but a vow of protection, of devotion, of a love that had defied time itself. The attempted assassination forged a new resolve in General Shang. The northern warlord had crossed a line not just by targeting him, but by harming her. In the days that followed, Li Lin saw a change in him. The cold, detached general was gone, replaced by a man fueled by a fierce, protective love. He spent hours in the war room, his strategies becoming more aggressive, more brilliant, more unpredictable. He included her in these sessions now, not as a curiosity, but as a genuine strategist. They expect a hammer blow, he would say, pointing at the map. How do we strike where they are soft? Li Lin, drawing from history books and even modern guerrilla warfare concepts, suggested tactics of misinformation, targeted raids on supply lines, and winning the loyalty of the local populations under the warlord's control. A leader without the support of his people is like a tree without roots, she said. He will fall with the first strong wind. Shang Wei listened, his admiration for her growing with each passing day. He was no longer just in love with her. He was in awe of her. Together, they crafted a campaign that was as much about winning hearts and minds as it was about winning battles. The day of his departure for the front lines arrived too soon. The courtyard was a chaos of marching soldiers and neighing horses, but for Li Lin and Shang Wei, the world had shrunk to just the two of them. He stood before her in his full battle armor, the embodiment of power and strength, but his eyes as they looked at her were soft. "I will return," he vowed, his voice low and intense. "I will crush this threat, and I will return to you. Not to the Liang Mai I was promised, but to the woman who fell from the stars and remade my world." He took her hand and pressed a small, cold object into her palm. It was a tiger-shaped token, carved from a single piece of jade, the symbol of his authority. "This commands my personal guard. They are yours. Your safety is their only duty until I return." Tears welled in Li Lin's eyes. This was more than a token of affection. It was the ultimate trust. He was giving her his power, his protection, his heart. "Come back to me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Your world is my world now." He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was both a promise and a farewell. It was filled with all the words they didn't have time to say, all the love that had grown in the most impossible of circumstances. As he mounted his horse and rode out of the gates at the head of his army, Li Lin clutched a jade token to her chest. She was no longer a lost soul from the future. She was a woman with a home, a purpose, and a love worth fighting for. The war was his to win on the battlefield, but her own battle to secure his home and prove her place in this ancient world was just beginning. With the general gone, the estate became a different kind of battlefield. The senior advisors, old men set in their ways, initially dismissed Li Lin's authority. They saw the tiger token as a mere trinket, not a symbol of true power. The first test came when a flood destroyed a village's grain stores. The advisors suggested sending a token amount of aid after the paperwork was processed. Paperwork? Li Lin's voice was calm but held a sharp edge. "These people will starve by the time your ink dries." She summoned the captain of the guard. "Open the military granaries, distribute grain to every family, and send carpenters to help rebuild." The captain hesitated, looking at the advisors. Li Lin simply held up the jade tiger. His eyes widened, and he bowed deeply. "At once, my lady." The village was saved. News spread of the general's wife, who acted with decisiveness and compassion. The people who had only known her as a silent figure began to look at her with respect and gratitude. The general's victories at the front were met with silence from the imperial court. No reinforcements, no supplies. Li Lin knew this was the work of his political enemies, who saw a chance to let him fail. Worse, rumors began to swirl within the estate itself. Whispers that the foreign lady was a bad omen, that her strange ways were the reason the general faced such difficulties. One night, a fire broke out in the stores. It was quickly extinguished, but the message was clear. There was a traitor inside the walls. Li Lin didn't panic. She gathered the entire household in the main courtyard. She stood on the steps, the tiger token visible in her hand. "I know one of you did this," she said, her voice carrying in the cold night air. "You seek to weaken the general while he fights for all of us. But understand this. His cause is my cause. His home is my home, and I will protect it with every resource I have." She looked at the sea of faces, her gaze steady. The one responsible will be found. But for the rest of you, know that loyalty will be rewarded tenfold. We are not just a household. We are the General's foundation. And a strong foundation cannot be broken by a single spark of treachery. Her words, firm and just, quelled the fear and uncertainty. That night, a young maid came to her privately, confessing she had seen a stable hand acting suspiciously. The traitor was uncovered. Li Lin had passed her greatest test yet, not with force, but with unwavering leadership. She had secured the home front. Months later, the thunder of hooves announced the army's return. General Shang Wei rode through the gates, weary but victorious. He expected to find his estate in the state he left it, but something was different. The guards stood taller, the gardens were more vibrant, and there was a palpable sense of order and prosperity. He was greeted not by his stewards, but by the leaders of the local villages, who praised the Lady of the Jade Tiger for her wisdom and compassion during the floods. His own advisors, once skeptical, now spoke of her with genuine respect. He found her in his study, surrounded by scrolls and ledgers. She looked up, and the smile that lit her face stole the breath from his lungs. In that moment, he didn't see a time traveler or a substitute bride. He saw his partner, his equal. You have done all this?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. "We held the foundation, General," she replied softly. "As you asked." He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go. "The title General is for my soldiers," he whispered against her hair. "To you, I am just Shang Wei, a man who has come home to his heart." That evening, under the same moon that had witnessed their first tense encounters, they finally spoke of the future. "Will you stay?" he asked, his voice vulnerable. The fear of her vanishing as mysteriously as she appeared was a shadow in his eyes. Li Lin looked around the study, at the life they had built together. She thought of her old world, a distant, fading dream. This, here with him, was her reality now. This was where she belonged. "My world is 1,000 years away," she said, taking his hand. "But my heart is here, with you. I'm not going anywhere." He brought her hand to his lips, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Then I will spend every day of my life ensuring you never regret that choice." He led her to a secluded pavilion overlooking the lotus pond. Under the starlit sky, he kissed her with all the passion, gratitude, and love that had grown between them, a love that had conquered prejudice, war, and the impossible barrier of time itself. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. More stories await, only on Drama Tales.